"My child needs the window seat. You have to move," the cold voice rang out, tearing apart the previously peaceful atmosphere in the crowded airplane cabin. A white woman stood blocking the aisle, her demanding gaze fixed on the black female student. A heavy silence fell. Passengers around glanced over. Some sighed, a few turned away, pretending not to hear. But no one could have anticipated that in just a few minutes, the situation would completely reverse. And the most surprising part? The only person who would leave this confrontation embarrassed was not the young student. The loudspeaker announcement echoed through the cabin, informing passengers about the upcoming flight from Philadelphia to Chicago. Amara Jackson, 17 years old, took a deep breath as she placed her backpack on the floor beside her seat, 14C. She wasn't afraid of flying, but this particular trip carried an invisible pressure weighing heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just any flight. It was the first step toward her national academic competition, a challenge that would be one of the biggest of her life. Talented students from across the country would compete, and winning would mean a prestigious scholarship, a golden ticket bringing her closer to her dream of attending Harvard University. This was also something her whole family was eagerly awaiting. Her mother, a nurse who worked overtime every week to support her, had cried when she found out her daughter had been chosen for this competition. Amara's math teacher, the one who inspired her to pursue this dream, had hugged her tightly and said, "Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself." Amara zipped up her backpack and pulled out a notebook filled with math formulas and history notes she was studying. Sitting in the aisle seat gave her enough space to stretch her legs and easily grab things without disturbing anyone. She had booked this seat in advance, ready for a quiet flight, focused on her upcoming test. But she had no idea this flight would present a whole different challenge. Footsteps echoed right next to Amara. She looked up and saw a middle-aged white woman standing close by, her hand resting on the shoulder of a young girl around 8 years old, holding a pink backpack. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice full of confidence. "My daughter needs to sit by the window. Could you switch seats with her?" Amara blinked and looked down at her reserved seat, 14C. She had been hoping for a quiet flight with no trouble, but she was very familiar with this kind of request. The tone, the way the woman didn't ask but almost commanded, and that scrutinizing look, Amara had seen it many times before. "I'm sorry, but this is the seat I reserved," Amara replied, her tone polite but firm. "I need to sit here to study." The woman blinked, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Amara's confidence seemed to make her uncomfortable. "My daughter is very nervous about flying," she said, lowering her voice to a whisper, but loud enough for those around them to hear. "Could you please be a little understanding? I'm sure your homework isn't as important as a child's comfort." A sharp pang in Amara's chest. She was trying to make her feel guilty. "I understand," Amara said, keeping her voice as calm as possible. "But I also need this seat to study. If the seat is that important to you, maybe you should ask the flight attendant to swap with someone else." The woman pursed her lips, her eyes moving from Amara's face to the notebook in her hand, then to her neatly tied, curly hair. It was a calculating, assessing look, followed by a flash of contempt in her eyes. Amara knew that look. She'd seen it when walking into expensive stores and being watched by security guards, when she raised her hand in class and was ignored by the teacher, when walking through wealthy neighborhoods and feeling people's eyes on her like she didn't belong. "Unbelievable," the woman muttered, turning away in annoyance. "So rude. You're young and already so selfish." Those words hit Amara's mind hard, but she clenched her fists, took a deep breath, and kept calm. But the story didn't end there. "All right," Karen said loudly, turning to a passing flight attendant. "I need to talk to you for a moment. There's an issue here." Amara felt her heart race. Nearby, passengers began to look over, sensing the tension spreading through the cabin. Their gazes focused on Amara, a young black student, and the middle-aged white woman asking for help. She had seen this scenario before, and it rarely ended in her favor. The flight had barely started, but Amara knew another battle was awaiting her right ahead. The sound of suitcase wheels rolling on the floor, the click of seatbelt clasps as passengers settled into their seats, but the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. A wave of tension spread as Karen Whitfield turned to the flight attendant, her demeanor that of someone who was sure she was being treated unfairly. Amara kept her eyes fixed on the notebook in her hands, but she could feel every gaze turning toward her. Some passengers glanced over with curiosity, while others simply lowered their heads to avoid making eye contact, as though afraid that getting involved might drag them into an unnecessary argument. The flight attendant stepped in. A professional yet calm voice spoke beside them. "Good evening. I'm Michaela, the head flight attendant on this flight. Is there anything I can assist you with?" Michaela, in her early 20s, youthful but with a confident demeanor, leaned down with the patient smile of someone who had dealt with countless awkward situations on a plane. Karen exhaled sharply, as if someone had finally appeared to restore order. "This girl here refuses to switch seats with my daughter," Karen said with an irritated tone, but intentionally trying to sound composed, as if she were playing the role of a polite passenger dealing with an unreasonable young woman. "I explained that my daughter gets anxious while flying and needs to sit by the window to feel safer, but she still refused to move. I really don't understand how a student could be so lacking in compassion." Karen emphasized the word student, as if to imply that Amara was just a child, not mature enough to understand what was right. Amara gripped the edge of her notebook, but she didn't let her frustration show on the outside. Michaela glanced at Amara, then turned back to Karen and the little girl who was still looking down, clutching her backpack straps. The girl seemed embarrassed, as though she were uncomfortable with her mother creating a scene in such a public place. "Let's check the seating arrangements again, shall we?" Michaela said in a calm but professional tone, pulling out a tablet and starting to check the details. Meanwhile, Karen didn't miss the chance to apply more pressure. "I don't think a young girl should be this stubborn," she continued, her tone softer but still full of implication. "I've taught my daughter that we should always be considerate and kind to others. I don't understand how some young people can be so selfish now. A child with special needs should certainly be prioritized over a seat, shouldn't she?" Nearby, passengers began turning to look. Some furrowed their brows, clearly uncomfortable being pulled into the argument, while others seemed to tacitly agree with Karen, especially when she mentioned a child with special needs. Amara could feel the weight of the stares on her, but she remained unshaken. She knew the game. Karen was trying to paint her as cold-hearted, a person who refused to help a child, a person lacking compassion, a person who didn't know better. And Amara knew, in situations like this, there was an unspoken truth. A black student standing up for her rights would always be seen as causing trouble, while a white woman demanding something unreasonable would easily be viewed as protecting her child. But she had fought her whole life not to let those biases make her lose her composure. "I booked this seat in advance," Amara said, her voice calm and firm. "I have the right to sit here." Michaela looked up from her tablet and nodded. "Yes, 14C is indeed your seat, and according to policy, passengers can sit in the seat they've reserved without being asked to move unless there is an emergency." Karen frowned, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Are you sure?" Her voice grew sharper, losing the polite tone from before. "So, you're saying That the needs of a child don't matter more than a young woman wanting space to study? Michaela maintained her professional demeanor, but there was a firmness in her gaze. "All passengers have the right to sit in their assigned seats, ma'am," she said, keeping her emotions in check. "If you need another seat, I can help you check if anyone is willing to swap." Karen bit her lip, realizing she was losing her advantage. She glanced at Amara again, this time not hiding the hatred in her eyes. "Unbelievable," she muttered, loud enough for Amara to hear. "Kids today don't know what manners are anymore." Amara didn't respond, but she could feel a wave of anger rising in her chest. "Would you like any further assistance?" Michaela asked, signaling that the argument was over. Karen tightened her grip on her purse, tossed her hair back, and reluctantly pulled her daughter toward the rear seats. Before leaving, she threw one last sharp look, as if warning Amara that this wasn't over. Amara took a deep breath, forcing herself to refocus on the notebook in front of her. But no matter how hard she tried, the words on the page blurred. She knew this wasn't really over, and she was right. Karen tossed her blonde hair back and pulled her young daughter along as they walked down the aisle of the plane with a stiff demeanor, but not before throwing a sharp glance toward Amara, a silent warning. The entire cabin seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as the argument died down, but there was still a lingering tension in the air. Amara didn't need to look back to know that some passengers were still staring at her, some possibly empathizing, others perhaps evaluating. But she didn't care. She kept her back straight, flipping through her notebook on the tray table, pretending to continue reading, though she knew she couldn't focus right now. A soft laugh came from beside her, pulling Amara out of her thoughts. "You handled that situation really well." She looked up for the first time and noticed the young man sitting in seat 14B next to her. He was tall, with a handsome face and neatly styled hair, though a little tousled in a natural way. His eyes sparkled with humor, but not in a mocking way. Instead, it was recognition and respect. "What do you mean?" Amara asked, raising an eyebrow. "I mean," he said, leaning in slightly as if to avoid being overheard, "I've never seen anyone make a Karen back down while still keeping their professionalism like that. Usually, they don't give up so easily." Amara couldn't help but smile, though her smile still held a hint of tension. "Believe me, I don't think she gave up either." The young man nodded understandingly and then extended his hand. "I'm Marcus Green, nice to meet you." Amara hesitated for a second but then shook his hand. "Amara Jackson." Marcus's handshake was firm but not too strong, a warm feeling amid the cold remnants of the recent confrontation. "So, Amara, what brings you to Chicago?" Marcus asked, his tone curious enough to show genuine interest but not intrusive. "I'm competing in an academic contest," Amara replied, finally remembering the reason she was on the plane in the first place. "A national competition. If I win, I could get a scholarship to Harvard." Marcus whistled softly. "Impressive. What subject are you competing in?" "History and mathematics," she replied, a hint of pride in her voice. "I love numbers, but I also enjoy stories about how the world changes over time." Marcus nodded as if he fully understood. "I'm on my way to Chicago for a conference. It's about educational equity and cultural diversity." That made Amara look up, her curiosity piqued. "Really? What's the conference about?" Marcus shrugged lightly, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that Amara immediately noticed. "We'll be discussing how school policies affect students of color. For example, being undervalued in class, fewer opportunities to access advanced programs, or being discriminated against when applying to prestigious schools." The way he spoke about the topic wasn't just book knowledge, it came from real-life experience, something Amara deeply resonated with. "I understand," she said, her voice softer. "I've had a teacher tell me straight up that instead of dreaming about Harvard, I should be more realistic and choose an easier school, one where I could keep up." Marcus gave a wry smile, but his gaze was sharp. "That sounds familiar," I was once told. "Surprising. You actually write essays really well." Amara let out a light laugh, but it was tinged with bitterness. "The toxic kind of praise." Marcus nodded in agreement. "Exactly. They think they're encouraging you, but in reality, they're showing they never believed you could do it in the first place." An invisible connection began to form between them. Not just because they were both smart and ambitious, but because they both understood what it felt like to be underestimated simply because of their skin color. That feeling of needing to work twice as hard to be recognized for half the effort someone else would get. The flight stabilized in the air, and the lights outside the window reflected brightly in Marcus's eyes as he turned to Amara with a rare sincerity. "So, are you nervous about the competition?" Amara pursed her lips and then nodded. "I am. I've prepared a lot. But I know that in the exam room there will be people like that Karen. They won't look at my grades first. They'll look at me and decide if I'm worthy." Marcus didn't say anything right away, just nodded, as if he understood that feeling all too well. "But you're not going to let them stand in your way, are you?" he asked, a smile briefly crossing his lips. Amara smiled faintly, her smile a bit sharp. "No way." Marcus laughed and leaned back, staring up at the plain ceiling. "Good, because if anyone deserves to win, it's you." The words weren't flattery, they were a confirmation, a recognition from someone who truly empathized. In that moment, Amara felt something she hadn't felt since boarding the plane. A sense of relief, a strange reassurance that, no matter what challenges tomorrow would bring, she wouldn't be alone on this journey. Chicago greeted Amara with a gray sky, not exactly gloomy, but carrying a chill that seeped into the air. She tightened her light jacket and stepped out of the taxi, looking up at the building where the competition was taking place. A luxurious convention center with rows of grand white columns and glass windows reflecting the entire city. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her pounding heart and return it to a normal rhythm. This wasn't her first time competing in a major event, but this time, everything felt different. Everyone knew this competition wasn't just an academic challenge. It was a gateway to once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. A prestigious scholarship, a ticket closer to Harvard, to the future she had envisioned long ago. As she walked through the revolving glass door, Amara immediately sensed the tense atmosphere around her. Other contestants were already present, each carrying a confident yet slightly anxious demeanor. They wore neat outfits, formal but not too much, still exuding the seriousness of people who had spent years sharpening their intellect to be here. Small groups were gathered, chatting amongst themselves, some glancing at Amara with a curious look. She knew that not everyone was here just to compete fairly. This wasn't just a battle of knowledge, it was a psychological war, a fight to assert one's position in a world filled with competition. Amara set her backpack down on a chair and unzipped it to pull out a stack of documents marked with blue underlines. She tried to focus, but couldn't stop herself from observing her surroundings, feeling the tension in every breath. And then, a moment froze her in place. From across the room, a familiar figure appeared, Karen Whitfield. Amara blinked, her heart seemingly stopping for a brief second. She was standing there, no longer with the frustration she had shown on the plane, no longer with the scowling defiance, but instead with a calm, authoritative composure. Her elegant dress, neatly styled hair, and high heels clicking sharply against the stone floor with each step. And most importantly, she was wearing a name tag. It clearly read her title, Karen Whitfield, judge of the competition. A cold chill spread from Amara's chest down to her fingers. She couldn't believe it. The woman who had tried to force her to give up her seat on the plane. The one who had looked at her with disdain. The one who had summoned the flight attendant with the face of someone absolutely certain they were right. That woman, right now, was one of the people who would decide her fate in this competition. She hadn't seen her yet. Not yet. But Amara knew that moment would come soon, and she couldn't predict what would happen. She forced herself to take a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Nothing had changed, she told herself. She would still compete. She would still do well. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Something had shifted, a silent threat hanging over her head. And then, as if pulled by an invisible force, Karen turned toward Amara. The moment their eyes met, something flickered in Karen's gaze. A recognition. A brief flash of surprise, then immediately replaced by a cold, calculating look. Amara saw it clearly. It wasn't just surprise. It was a spark of danger, a kind of awareness from someone who had lost in a confrontation before, and now had the chance to turn the tables. Karen didn't speak immediately, but she smiled lightly, a smile Amara did not like at all. She walked slowly toward Amara, each step like a wolf approaching its prey. "Young lady," Karen spoke, still wearing that thin smile. "How interesting to run into you here. Quite a surprising coincidence, isn't it?" Her tone was calm, but Amara could feel the sharp edge hidden in each word. Amara didn't allow herself to feel rattled, didn't show any sign of weakness. "Yes, a coincidence," she responded, keeping her voice steady, emotionless. Karen tilted her head, her gaze sweeping from head to toe, as though reassessing her. "I hope today will be a better experience for you than last time," she said, her voice tinged with an unreadable undertone, then turned and walked away before Amara could respond. Amara stood still, feeling like she had just weathered an invisible storm. She knew Karen had power in this competition. She knew she hadn't forgotten what happened on the plane, and she knew Karen was not someone who easily let things go. But most importantly, Karen Whitfield would not let her win easily. Amara clenched her fist under the table, feeling her nails dig into her skin. If this was a battle, she would not walk away without fighting to the end. Amara took a deep breath, exhaling slowly, trying to steady her rapidly beating heart as she entered the vast exam room. The space was designed like a hall, with rows of long desks spaced evenly apart. Each contestant had a tablet to take the test, and at the front was a large stage where the judges could observe everything. Cold white light illuminated each row of seats, reflecting the focused and tense expressions of the top contestants from across the United States. Amara glanced around. Some sat confidently with their backs straight. Others were flipping through their notes for the final time, while a few gripped the edges of their desks tightly, clearly nervous. She no longer cared about Karen Whitfield, at least not right now. This test wasn't about Karen, it was about her. A steady voice came over the microphone. "Dear contestants, welcome to the first round of the competition. You will have 90 minutes to complete the multiple-choice exam, covering topics from mathematics, science, history, to data analysis. Stay calm, think carefully, and good luck." A chime sounded from the tablets, signaling the start of the exam. Amara adjusted her posture, her eyes quickly scanning the first question. Easy. She entered her answer in seconds and moved on to the next. Focused. don't get distracted. The third question, the fourth. Everything was familiar, all within what she had practiced for months. Before long, Amara had completed 50% of the test when she noticed something unusual. A strange feeling, a very familiar feeling, that someone was watching her. She quickly glanced towards the judge's area and wasn't surprised to meet Karen Whitfield's gaze. Karen didn't blink, her hand resting lightly on her chin as though considering something. But there was something in her eyes beyond mere observation. It was scrutiny. It was waiting. She wanted to see Amara make a mistake. Amara tightened her grip subtly but didn't let emotions cloud her judgment. She turned back to her test, focusing completely as numbers and data absorbed her attention. When the screen flashed to indicate she had completed the test, Amara looked up without needing to check her answers. She knew she had done well. After the test ended, the top 10 contestants would be chosen for the next round. The results were announced right there in the hall, and when the big screen displayed the top 10 names, Amara saw hers in second place. No surprises there. But Karen Whitfield's reaction was something else. She couldn't hide the displeasure on her face. Though still wearing a polite smile, Amara saw the tension in her expression, the way her hand clenched slightly, as if she couldn't believe the results. Then, Karen's voice echoed, carrying an underlying sharpness. "Congratulations to those who made it to the next round." Karen smiled, her eyes slowly lingering on Amara for a moment longer before continuing. "However, scores are not everything. The next round will be a real challenge to see who truly deserves to move forward." Those words hung in the air like a warning. Amara didn't need anyone to tell her that the next challenge wouldn't be easy. Just as Amara stepped out of the hall, a soft but sharp voice spoke beside her. "You did well, Amara." She turned to find the warm yet firm gaze of Elizabeth Wells, one of the veteran judges of the competition. Elizabeth, in her early 40s, had a slender figure but radiated a calm and strong presence, the kind of person who could command attention in a room without raising her voice. "Thank you," Amara said, a quiet sense of gratitude creeping into her voice. Elizabeth watched her for a moment, then spoke more softly, though still with a sharp edge in her tone. "I've been observing all day, and I can tell you one thing. You have incredible talent." But then, she leaned slightly towards Amara, her voice dropping lower, "and there's also a clear bias happening." Amara wasn't surprised. Elizabeth quickly glanced towards Karen, who was now talking to a group of other judges, then turned back to Amara with a serious look in her eyes. "I won't let that affect this competition. Keep doing what you've been doing, and remember, not everyone is like her." Her words weren't just encouragement, they were confirmation that someone was on Amara's side, that she wasn't alone in fighting against this system. Amara nodded, tightening her backpack straps, feeling her resolve strengthen. From a distant corner of the hall, Marcus Green observed everything with sharp eyes. He had seen Karen's look when the results were read. He had seen how she reacted to Amara advancing to the next round. He had noticed every little thing, the gestures, the glances, the seemingly innocuous words that were laced with intent. And he knew one thing for sure. This battle wasn't over. Marcus tightened his grip on his phone, opened a message, and sent just 2 words to Amara. "Play fair." Though the message was brief, Amara understood immediately. He was reminding her that not everyone was here to compete fairly, but she had to do it with her own talent. She took a deep breath once more, holding firm to her resolve. No matter what Karen did, no matter how hard she tried to make things difficult, Amara wouldn't back down. She would fight with her intellect, her perseverance, with everything she had, and she would win. Another opportunity appears. Amara was still reflecting on what had happened in the exam room as she stepped out of the vast hallway of the conference center. The chilly Chicago air carried a biting cold, but she didn't feel it. She was still sorting everything out in her mind. The first round of the competition was over. She had done well. Very well. But she knew that this competition was not just a simple knowledge test. There were hands pulling the strings behind the scenes, and she had encountered one of them, Karen Whitfield. She had made her intentions clear. And this was no longer just a competition between contestants. "Do you have a minute?" Elizabeth Wells' voice came from behind, pulling Amara out of her thoughts. She turned around and saw Elizabeth walking toward her, holding an off-white envelope. Her face was not tense like Karen's, but instead carried a sharpness mixed with a sense of trust. "I have a special invitation for you," Elizabeth said, handing the envelope to Amara. Amara took it, a bit curious as she opened the envelope. The embossed text on the card made her heart beat just a little faster. Davenport Foundation Charity Gala, Chicago Cultural Center, 7 p.m., welcoming the leaders and future talents in education. She looked up at Elizabeth, cautious. "What is this?" Elizabeth smiled, but her eyes held more meaning than just a simple invitation. The Davenport Foundation Charity Gala. This is one of the biggest events of the year, where key figures in education, scholarship donors, and, of course, the judges of this competition will be present. Amara felt something stir in her mind, a chance. A chance not just to attend a glamorous event, but also to meet people who might open doors she had never thought possible. But then, another thought crossed her mind. If Karen Whitfield was one of the main judges, would she be there? "And will Karen be there?" Amara asked, her voice betraying caution. Elizabeth gave a slight nod, her gaze sharpening just a little. Of course, she's one of the organizers of the event. The tension returned to Amara's chest. What did this mean? A great opportunity, but also another battle. Elizabeth seemed to understand what was going through Amara's mind as she tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but firm. "You don't have to go if you don't want to, but I think you should. Not just to impress those who can help you, but also to show that you fear no one." Amara felt a quiet fire ignite within her. She was right. She wasn't here to back down. "I'll go," she said, her voice now full of resolve. Amara was still thinking about the invitation as she left the conference center. She pulled her phone from her pocket and texted Marcus, who had left right after the exam. "Amara, you won't believe it. I just got invited to a charity gala. The Davenport Foundation is hosting it and all the judges will be there." Marcus, "Well, looks like you're stepping into the world of the elite now." Amara, "If that's what elite looks like, I think I prefer my own world." Marcus, "Are you going?" Amara, "Yes, even though Karen will be there." Marcus, "Then you need an ally. Let me go with you." Amara paused for a moment, looking at the phone screen. The truth was, she didn't want to walk into the gala alone. She didn't want to face all the scrutinizing eyes, especially Karen Whitfield's. Having Marcus by her side would be an advantage. Amara, "All right, but don't think of this as a date." Marcus, "Of course, this is just a strategic mission to deal with the ones who don't play fair." Amara, "Good, see you at the gala." Amara smiled, slipping the phone back into her pocket. A feeling of confidence was rising within her. Even if this was a trap, even if Karen was waiting to make things difficult for her, she wouldn't walk in alone. And she wouldn't let anyone stand in the way of her path. Amara stepped out of the car, her hand gently gripping the strap of her small handbag as her gaze scanned the scene before her. The Chicago Cultural Center stood tall and magnificent under the warm glow of the yellow lights. Marble steps stretched out, leading up to a grand hall, where guests had already begun to gather, chatting and raising glasses of champagne under the twinkling glow of the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. Marcus appeared beside her, looking sharp in a black suit, a perfect contrast to Amara's deep blue dress, simple yet elegant in design. "Welcome to the world of the powerful," Marcus whispered, his eyes scanning the space ahead with a careful, observant look. Amara tightened her grip on the bag strap but remained calm. "And tonight, we're not just ordinary guests." She knew that. Karen knew that. And this wasn't just a charity event, this was where true power was distributed. They entered the hall, where the sounds of conversation echoed around them. Amara could recognize the most prestigious figures from the academic world, major sponsors of large scholarship funds, competition judges, people who could change someone's fate with a handshake or a decision in a boardroom. Then her eyes landed on a familiar figure. Karen Whitfield. She stood at the center of the room, her blonde hair perfectly styled into a neat bun, wearing a sharp red dress that exuded authority. Surrounding her were a group of judges and major sponsors, all listening intently as she spoke, her eyes lighting up every time she emphasized an important point. And then, as if an invisible thread pulled them together, Karen's gaze locked onto Amara. For a brief moment her expression remained unchanged, but Amara could clearly see the coldness lurking behind the professional smile. She couldn't escape Amara, and Amara couldn't escape her. Karen made the first move. She wasn't in a hurry, nor was she ostentatious, but each step toward Amara was deliberate and purposeful. Amara stood tall, showing no sign of hesitation. "Miss Jackson," Karen said, her smile sharp as a razor. "I didn't expect to see you here, quite an interesting surprise." She deliberately emphasized the word surprise, as if implying that Amara didn't deserve to be at such an event. "Miss Whitfield," Amara replied, her tone calm but unwavering. "I guess you're very lucky," Karen continued, her voice carrying a subtle tone of sarcasm. "Not everyone gets the chance to be invited to a gala like this. You must have made quite an impression in the competition." "Yes, I think I did," Amara said, maintaining her composure. "I'm sure the judges saw my true potential." Karen's eyes briefly darkened, but she quickly regained her smile. "Of course," she nodded, though her tone grew a bit colder. "Talent is only part of the equation. In competitions like these, what's more important is understanding how things really work." A veiled warning, a reminder that talent alone is not always enough to win. Amara understood the implication without needing to be told, but she didn't back down. "I agree," she said, offering a polite but firm smile. "And that's why I'm honored to be here. I believe learning firsthand from experienced people like you will help me understand how things truly work." This time, Karen's expression froze for a brief second, as if she hadn't expected Amara to respond so sharply. But immediately she flashed another smile, a smile of someone who didn't like being challenged, but couldn't openly show her displeasure. "It's good that you have such a mindset," Karen said, her voice as cold as winter wind. "I hope you'll keep this spirit until the competition ends." A disguised threat, wrapped in a compliment. A reminder that she still controlled the game. But Amara didn't waver. "You as well, Miss Whitfield," she said, tilting her head slightly, her smile still unwavering. Karen stood there for a moment, her gaze heavier than before turning and walking away, blending into the crowd. As soon as Karen disappeared from sight, Marcus approached Amara, holding a glass of champagne. "That went pretty well," he murmured, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Should I be worried? You seem quite good at these behind-the-scenes battles." Amara chuckled softly, though the tension inside her hadn't quite dissipated. "I'm not good," she said. "I just don't like being underestimated." Marcus studied her for a moment, then handed her the champagne glass. "Well, then drink up," he said gently, "because tonight has only just begun." Amara took the glass, her gaze sweeping across the room, where the powerful were deep in conversation, and where Karen stood in a group of judges, occasionally glancing in her direction. She knew the game was far from over, but she also knew she was ready. The gala night wasn't just a party, it was another battle where decisions, glances, and ambiguous words could change a person's life. Amara had entered the world of the powerful, and she knew if she wasn't careful, they would do everything to push her out. But one thing was certain, she was no longer a pawn, and Karen wouldn't control her so easily. Amara gently tightened her grip on the champagne glass, her eyes scanning the lavish room, where conversations continued smoothly and calculatingly. The people standing here held true power in their hands, despite their friendly, dazzling appearances. Those who bore the title of educators, generous sponsors, and sharp-eyed judges. But not everyone was on Karen's side. From the opposite side of the room, a middle-aged man in an elegant tuxedo observed her with a discreet, yet keen interest. As Amara raised the glass to her lips, he stepped forward, walking with confidence but without flair. "Miss Jackson, may I speak with you for a moment?" His voice was steady and composed, but Amara immediately sensed a deeper layer in the way he spoke. This was no ordinary conversation. She set the glass down on a nearby table, nodding with cautious readiness. "Of course, sir. Julian Washington," he introduced himself, shaking her hand with a firm, sure grip. "I'm one of the judges for the competition." Amara paused briefly, but quickly masked her surprise. Julian Washington. The name was familiar. He was one of the most influential African-American leaders in the field of education, having once headed a policy advocacy organization for equality in education before joining high-level committees. And most importantly, he was one of the truly influential voices on the panel. "I heard about your excellent performance in the qualifiers," Julian said as they moved to a quieter part of the hall. "Your score is very impressive." Amara didn't immediately respond. She knew that praise in this environment was always tied to a deeper message. "Thank you, sir," she replied, maintaining a calm tone. "I just did my best." Julian smiled slightly, his eyes sharp with wisdom. "I've been involved in many competitions in the education sector, and I've seen too many instances where talent is stifled by the very system that should be honoring it." Amara sensed the true meaning behind his words. She clenched her hands together subtly, staying composed, but could not deny that those words hit a truth she had faced her entire life. "Are you referring to Karen?" Amara asked, deciding to address the matter directly. Julian tilted his head, appraising her briefly, then nodded. "I can't speak for anyone else, but I can tell you that I've seen people like her before." "People like her?" "People who don't want to see those like us go further than they think we deserve." The statement needed no further explanation. Amara understood all too well. Karen Whitfield was not just a strict judge. She was a controller. Someone who believed her power could decide who had a chance and who did not. and she certainly did not want a 17-year-old black girl whom she had once dismissed to win in front of her eyes. But Julian Washington was different. "Will you be keeping a close eye on the competition?" Amara asked, her eyes now shining with a stronger belief than before. Julian smiled lightly, but his smile carried a promise. "Fairness is something I've fought for my entire career. I won't let anyone manipulate it." Amara felt a weight lift from her chest. She was not alone in this fight. There were people with true power who were watching. People not swayed by biases like Karen. Julian nodded to her, then walked away. But before he left, he looked back at her with a gentle yet firm reminder. "Don't let them shake you." Amara nodded slowly, a determined smile forming on her lips. "I won't." As soon as Julian left, Elizabeth Wells appeared beside Amara, still holding a glass of champagne as if she had never left. "Well," Elizabeth said with a knowing smile, "looks like you just had an interesting conversation." Amara turned to look at her, her eyes reflecting gratitude. "I think I just gained another ally." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, sipping her champagne before replying. "You have more than one ally, Amara. I won't let Karen Whitfield play dirty with you. And now, I'm certain you have Julian on your side." Amara let out a quiet sigh, feeling as though a part of the pressure in her heart had been released. There were those trying to bring her down, but there were also those willing to protect her. This game was not only in Karen's hands. Elizabeth observed Amara's reaction for a moment, then added with a soft yet meaningful tone, "Remember, the path to victory is not always straight, but if you stay steady, you'll reach the finish line." The gala night continued, but Amara had found two crucial allies for the upcoming battle. Karen remained a dangerous force, but she was not the only one with a voice on the judging panel. And there was one thing Amara had firmly decided in her mind. She would not let anyone take away the opportunity she truly deserved. Amara woke up before dawn, when the Chicago sky was still sparkling with scattered streetlights. Today was the deciding day, the final round, the last battle. She stood in front of the mirror, her eyes locked on her own reflection. There were no signs of worry or fear, only determination. This was no longer just a competition. This was a war. She had prepared her whole life for today, and she wouldn't let anyone, especially Karen Whitfield, steal victory from her hands. As she walked into the competition hall, a serious and resolute atmosphere filled the space. The other contestants also recognized the pressure of the day, but Amara knew that only one person truly wanted her to fail, and when she looked toward the judges' table, Karen was there, waiting. The final round was unlike any of the previous rounds. This wasn't a multiple-choice test, nor was it an essay that could be graded objectively. This was a live debate. Each contestant would be asked an open-ended question, requiring an immediate response, analysis of the issue, counter-arguments, and the demonstration of sharp thinking. There were no absolute right answers. Everything depended on how each contestant defended their point of view. And Amara knew well that this was a playground where Karen could easily manipulate things. A question could be phrased in many different ways. A judge could emphasize weaknesses rather than acknowledge strengths. A contestant could be put in a difficult position simply due to personal biases. And when it was Amara's turn, she was ready. "Ms. Jackson, I have a question for you," Karen said, her smile sharp as a knife, crossing her face. She wasn't in a hurry, nor was she unprofessional, but every word she spoke carried hidden meaning. "If you had the power to decide national education policy, what would you do to improve the system without affecting students who are currently performing well by today's standards?" a question full of trickery. Amara recognized it immediately. This wasn't an innocent question. It was designed to put her in a difficult position. Karen wanted Amara to choose between improving the education system for underperforming students or maintaining the current standards for successful ones. If she emphasized change, Karen could attack her for disrupting the existing system. If she defended the status quo, Karen could attack her for not having a real solution to the injustice in education. A perfect trap. But Amara remained unfazed. She calmly took the microphone, her eyes locked on Karen. "Thank you for the question, but I think there's a mistaken assumption in how it was phrased." Karen blinked slightly, a rare sign of surprise. "We shouldn't think of education as a zero-sum game, where if one group of students benefits, another must suffer." Amara continued, her tone firm but not harsh. "Education can be improved in ways that allow all students to thrive, not by taking opportunities from one group to elevate another, but by expanding resources to ensure every student has access to quality education." A perfect counterattack. Karen couldn't refute it. She couldn't criticize Amara for wanting to improve education. She couldn't twist it to say that Amara wanted to harm successful students. Amara had broken the trap Karen set, right in front of all the judges and contestants. After Amara finished her presentation, the room fell into an awkward silence. Then Julian Washington subtly nodded, a satisfied smile briefly appearing on his face. Elizabeth Wells also nodded, her eyes gleaming with clear pride. The other judges whispered to each other, some quickly jotting notes on their evaluation sheets. Karen tried to remain calm, but Amara could clearly see the tension in her shoulders, her hand gripping the pen on the table. She hadn't expected this. She had tried to control the game, but in that moment she realized she had failed. Amara had proven she was not only smart, but also not easily manipulated. Karen might not like the result, but she couldn't deny it. When the round ended, Amara stepped off the stage, a mix of relief and determination filling her heart. Marcus stood waiting for her just outside, hands in his pockets, a slight smirk on his face. "You just did something no one else dared to do." "Did what?" Amara asked, raising an eyebrow. Marcus chuckled softly and shook his head. "You just made Karen Whitfield lose face in front of the entire panel of judges." Amara smiled faintly, but she knew this wasn't over. The battle had one final step, announcing the winner. And if Karen still held power, she might find one last way to stop her. But Amara was no longer afraid. She had proven herself, even in front of the most powerful people. Now there was only one question left. Would justice prevail? Amara sat quietly in her seat, her eyes fixed on the stage where Richard Davenport, the head judge, stood with an envelope in his hand. The large conference room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone was waiting for a single moment, the moment when the winner's name would be announced. But for Amara, the tension was not merely excitement or nervousness like the other contestants. It was a psychological battle she knew she was facing. She didn't look at Richard but directed her gaze toward the judges' table. There, Julian Washington sat with steady composure, his sharp eyes calm and collected. He didn't seem worried, as if he had known the result for a long time. Elizabeth Wells, however, was different. She didn't show much emotion, but the slight curve at the corners of her lips suggested satisfaction. Both of them were allies Amara was fortunate to have, but there was one more person she couldn't help but notice, Karen Whitfield. She sat there, her hands tightly clenched on the table, her fingers tapping lightly on the wood surface in a slow, rhythmic pattern, as if calculating something. Her gaze didn't focus on the stage, but instead silently scanned the crowd, as if trying to find someone who might stand by her side. But all she received in return was silence and the sense of defeat that lingered around her. Richard took a deep breath and then smiled. After an intense competition and careful evaluation by the panel of judges, we are pleased to announce the winner of this year's contest. He paused, adding drama to the moment. Amara could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but her face remained calm. She had fought with all her might, and now it all depended on this moment. "The winner is Amara Jackson!" The room erupted in applause. Some of the other contestants clapped enthusiastically, and a few judges nodded in approval. But at that moment, Amara only cared about one thing: the expression on Karen Whitfield's face. She froze. For a moment, her face seemed locked in place, unable to react to what had just happened. Then, very slowly, she blinked, trying to regain her composure. But no matter how hard she tried, Amara could clearly see the defeat written all over her face. She couldn't do anything. She had lost. There was no one by her side to manipulate this result. Too many witnesses had seen the fairness of the competition. Amara's scores couldn't be altered, and her debate performance was so exceptional that anyone had to acknowledge it. Amara slowly stood up and walked toward the stage amid the roaring applause. She felt lighter than ever. This victory wasn't just hers. It was for everyone who had ever been underestimated, who had ever had opportunities taken away just because someone thought they didn't deserve it. As she passed the judges' table, her gaze met Karen's once more. There was no sharp smile, no smug look like the first time they met on the plane. Karen just sat there, her eyes empty, as if trying to understand what had gone wrong. But nothing had gone wrong. Karen had been wrong from the start, thinking she could control this outcome. Richard handed Amara the prestigious trophy and a certificate. "Congratulations, Amara," he said, his voice full of recognition. "You've proven that talent and intellect can overcome any challenge." She took the trophy with both hands, feeling the cold metal against her skin, reminding her that this wasn't a dream. She had done it. In that moment, she looked out at the audience. Julian Washington was smiling at her. Elizabeth Wells nodded, her eyes full of pride. And Marcus, he was standing at the back of the hall, giving her a thumbs up, his smile brighter than ever. The feeling of victory was incredible. But more importantly, it was the feeling of justice. Amara stepped down from the stage, surrounded by congratulations. When she returned to her seat, Marcus was already waiting for her. "You just did something no one else dared to do," he said, his hands in his pockets, his eyes shining with pride. "Did what?" Amara asked, raising an eyebrow. Marcus chuckled. "You just made Karen Whitfield look foolish right in front of the whole judging panel." Amara smiled faintly, but she knew this wasn't over. Even though Karen had lost this competition, she was still a powerful figure. She might not have been able to change the result, but that didn't mean she would give up. However, Amara wasn't afraid anymore. She had proven herself, even to the most powerful people. Now there was only one question left. Would Karen give up? But right now she didn't care. This victory was hers, and she was going to savor every moment of it. When Amara stepped out of the hall where the competition had just ended, she felt a wave of relief and excitement spreading through every fiber of her being. She had just gone through the toughest battle of her life. Not only an academic test, but a fight against prejudice and manipulation from those in power. But she had won. Under the Chicago sun, a cool breeze brushed against Amara's face, bringing with it a strange sense of peace. She looked down at the glittering trophy in her hand, a symbol not just of victory but of perseverance and fairness. Beside her, Marcus walked slowly, hands in his pockets, but a clear smile on his face. "How does it feel to be the winner?" Marcus asked, his voice full of admiration. Amara took a deep breath, holding the trophy tightly. "Amazing," she said, but then her gaze grew distant. "But at the same time, I know this is just the beginning." Marcus nodded in agreement. "That's right. Winning is one thing, but how you leverage that victory is what really matters." Amara understood that clearly, and she had no intention of stopping here. The next morning, Amara woke up in the hotel, the feeling of victory still lingering in her mind. But when she checked her phone, she had no idea that the real storm was just beginning. Her inbox was flooded with interview invitations from top universities: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Stanford. Each letter contained respectful invitations, expressing interest in her talent and a desire for an official interview. Amara blinked, almost unable to believe what she was seeing. These weren't just any universities. These were the pinnacles of higher education, doors that only a few could even dream of opening. She read each email, her heart racing. Harvard, her dream, was now becoming a reality. They hadn't just sent a notification email. One of the professors at Harvard had even offered a direct call with her this week. Marcus noticed the expression on Amara's face as she sat on the hotel lobby couch, her eyes glued to the phone screen. He walked over, raising an eyebrow. "What's going on?" Amara showed him her phone, and Marcus whistled in impressed surprise. "Wow! No kidding, Amara. These are the invites that people would do anything to get." Amara swallowed, still in shock. "I know, but I didn't think it would happen this fast." Marcus laughed. "Don't you realize what you've done? You've beaten the toughest competitors in a national competition. You've proven yourself not just academically, but in critical thinking. These universities aren't looking for students with high grades alone. They're looking for people with the potential to make a difference." Amara quietly looked down at the screen, where the interview invitations from some of the most prestigious schools in the world still appeared before her eyes. A sense of pride, but also heavy responsibility, swelled within her. "I have to choose the right path," she said softly. Marcus nodded. "And you won't be going alone." They left the hotel to take a walk along the shores of Lake Michigan, where the cool breeze from the water felt refreshing. Chicago stretched out before them, bustling but carrying an unusual beauty. Amara knew Marcus also had big plans for his future. He had told her about wanting to pursue a path in education policy and social justice. "What do you think about us teaming up?" Amara suddenly asked, her eyes serious. Marcus looked at her curious. "Teaming up in what way?" "We both have similar goals. You want to change the education system from a policy angle, and I want to do it from the inside. If we develop our ideas together, maybe we can create something bigger than ourselves." Marcus paused for a moment, but Amara could see the spark in his eyes. "Are you talking about building a real platform?" "Not just a platform," Amara said, "but a movement. Something that can give students like us a real chance, without having to fight people like Karen Whitfield for it." Marcus smiled, but this time the smile was full of real excitement. "You know, Amara, you have the ability to turn bold ideas into reality, and honestly, I like that." They shook hands, but Amara knew this wasn't just any handshake. This was a promise. They weren't just friends, they were allies, and the world would soon know them. As Amara and Marcus left the lakeshore to return to the hotel, she happened to spot a familiar figure in the distance. Karen Whitfield. She was standing by the side of a nearby street, talking to a man in a dark suit. She didn't see Amara, but Amara could clearly see the dissatisfaction on her face. Even though the competition had ended, she still couldn't accept the truth. Amara didn't know what Karen was discussing, but a strange feeling rose within her. She hadn't given up. She looked at Marcus, and he had seen it too. "She still has something up her sleeve," Marcus whispered. Amara tightened her grip. "Maybe, but this time I won't give her a chance." She had won, but she knew the battle with people like Karen would never truly end. But this time, she wasn't a lonely student stepping into a competition. This time, she had power, recognition, and, more importantly, she had a purpose greater than herself. And nothing, not even people like Karen Whitfield, could stop her. Chicago was still lingering with the cold of late winter as Amara sat quietly by the hotel window, looking down at the brightly lit streets. The city was still bustling, with cars passing by as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside Amara, everything had changed. The competition, the victory, the confrontation with Karen Whitfield. Everything felt like a storm that had swept her into a world she never thought she'd face at the age of 17. Yet, it was in the most difficult moments that she realized the greatest truth about justice and personal strength. Justice doesn't always come easily, but that doesn't mean it's unattainable. She slowly sipped her hot tea, feeling the warmth spread over her tongue, soothing the tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding within her for days. "Do you think you've changed?" Marcus's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He was sitting across from her, arms crossed, his gaze filled with thoughtful observation. Amara smiled faintly, placing her teacup on the table. "Yes, but not in the way I thought I would." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She gently rotated her cup in her hands, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from the tea's surface, as if searching for an answer within it. "Before, I always thought that as long as I was the best, the most excellent, everything would naturally fall into place. I believed that if I could prove my ability, no one could stop me." Marcus listened quietly, not interrupting. Amara exhaled lightly, her eyes reflecting a deep contemplation. "But this competition has shown me something different. Justice doesn't always come from natural recognition. It needs to be protected. It needs people who are willing to stand up for it." Marcus nodded, his eyes gleaming with understanding, like Julian Washington, like Elizabeth Wells. Amara smiled. "And like you." He laughed, but then grew more serious. "You're right, justice isn't something that exists naturally. It's something we have to fight for." She nodded slowly. If Julian and Elizabeth hadn't been on the panel, who knows what would have happened? If there hadn't been witnesses who saw the truth, Karen might have tried to change the results. I've realized that being good alone isn't enough. What matters is having allies, people who believe in you and are willing to stand up when needed. Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking at her with a mix of admiration and contemplation. "So, what do you think is the biggest lesson from all of this?" Amara thought for a few seconds, then looked up, her gaze firm. "That we can't fight alone. No one can take on a system that has existed for centuries, with just intelligence or personal determination. But if we find those willing to fight alongside us, if we don't back down, no matter how hard it gets, then we can still win." Marcus looked at her for a moment, then nodded quietly. "I like the way you think, Amara." She chuckled softly. "I like the way I think more than I used to." After a while, Marcus left to prepare for his flight the next day, leaving Amara alone with her thoughts. She glanced at her phone. seeing a flood of congratulatory messages from family, friends, and even people she didn't know. But there was one message that stood out to her. Elizabeth Wells, proud of you. When you have time, reach out. We can do something bigger than this competition. An offer? An opportunity? Amara wasn't exactly sure what Elizabeth meant, but she knew one thing. This was a woman with influence, someone who understood how the system worked, and most importantly, someone who stood for justice. She smiled and scrolled down to another message. Julian, Washington. This victory isn't just for you, it's for everyone who's ever been denied a chance. Remember that. She took a deep breath. This victory wasn't just hers. It was a symbol that those with power cannot always control everything, that those who are underestimated are not always pushed to the sidelines. It was a reminder that justice isn't just an abstract concept, but something that can be achieved if enough people are willing to stand up for it. She put the phone down and looked out the hotel window once more. Her future was wide open, but more than that, she knew this was only the beginning, and she was ready for the next challenges. Amara returned to school with a completely different mindset from when she left. If before, she was an excellent student but sometimes felt out of place in an education system that wasn't entirely fair, now she saw the path ahead clearer than ever. She not only returned as the winner of a national-level academic competition, but also carried with her a stronger belief in her own value. That victory wasn't just a title. It was a declaration that, no matter how undervalued she was or how many obstacles she faced, she could stand up, fight, and claim the position she truly deserved. As soon as she stepped onto campus, she noticed a distinct change. The students who once only knew her as a top student now looked at her with admiration and respect. Some approached to congratulate her, while teachers offered words of pride. But what stood out the most was how her perception of the place had changed. If before, she saw herself merely as a student doing her best to achieve personal success, now she realized she could do more than that. She could create change. She could be the one to pave the way for other students, so no one would feel left out, so opportunities would be given fairly and truly based on merit, not prejudice or favoritism. It was a powerful thought, and she knew she couldn't ignore it. That afternoon, as Amara sat down at a table in the library, her phone vibrated with a new email. She glanced at the screen and immediately sat up straight as she read the subject line. From Professor Jonathan Mitchell, Department of Public Policy, Harvard University. Subject, a conversation about your future. She opened the email, her heart beating a little faster as she read each line. Hello, Amara. I followed the recent competition and was very impressed with your debating skills. Your confidence, sharp reasoning, and ability to counter arguments show that you're not only an excellent student, but also a potential leader. We would love to have a conversation with you to discuss your academic path and the opportunities that Harvard can offer. If you have time, please arrange a call for next week. Looking forward to speaking with you. Best regards, Jonathan Mitchell. Amara held her breath for a moment, then exhaled slowly. She had been hoping for an invitation from Harvard, but she hadn't expected it to come from one of the top professors at the school. And more than that, he didn't just see her as a potential candidate, but he saw something more in her. She quickly typed a response confirming the appointment. As she hit send, she knew a new chapter in her life was truly beginning. After leaving the library, Amara met Marcus at a cafe near campus. He had just received important news about his own future. "You're not the only one invited to Harvard," Marcus said, smirking as he stirred his coffee. Amara's eyes lit up as she placed her cup of tea on the table. "What do you mean?" "I just got a call from one of the professors in the public policy department. They're really interested in my research on inequality in education, and they want to meet with me to discuss a possible collaboration on a big project. Amara couldn't hide her excitement. Are you serious? So, we could both go to Harvard? Marcus smiled, but his expression remained serious. It depends on how things unfold, but if we both end up there, maybe your plan, the movement you want to build, could actually come to life. Amara looked at him, a strong feeling rising in her chest. She wasn't alone on this journey. She had a true ally, someone who shared her vision, someone who not only believed in her but was also ready to fight by her side. She knew that Karen Whitfield was just one of many people they would have to face along the way. But now she was no longer afraid because she wasn't alone. That evening, when Amara got home, she opened her notebook. She flipped through pages filled with thoughts, plans, and dreams she had written out long before everything started. Then she pulled out her pen and wrote a line in the middle of the blank page. Justice never comes naturally. It must be earned. She recalled the moments on the plane when Karen tried to force her to give up her seat. She remembered the moment in the exam room when Karen asked that malicious question to challenge her. She remembered the cold look in Karen's eyes when Amara won. And she realized that Karen was just a symbol of something bigger. This world was full of people like Karen, those who thought they could control everything, decide who deserved opportunities and who didn't. But the world also had people like Julian Washington, Elizabeth Wells, and Marcus. People who were willing to stand up and fight. And most importantly, it had people like her. People who wouldn't accept being defined by others. People who would fight to pave the way for those who came after them. She closed her notebook with a determined gaze. Justice never comes naturally. It must be earned. And she, Amara Jackson, was ready to step into a fight greater than ever before. That morning, as the soft sunlight filtered through the window, Amara woke up with a strange yet exciting feeling. The past few days had brought so many changes, from a fierce competition to new opportunities unfolding. But she knew everything wasn't over yet. In fact, her true journey was just beginning. She stretched and reached for her phone on the nightstand, planning to check messages like usual. But as soon as the screen lit up, an email notification made her freeze. From Harvard University Admissions. Subject: Invitation to join the Special Admissions Program, Harvard Future Leaders. Her heart seemed to stop for a moment. She immediately sat up straight, opened the email, and quickly scanned through the lines. Dear Amara, we are impressed by your performance in the recent national competition, as well as the excellent activities and critical thinking you have demonstrated. In our pursuit of discovering and nurturing future leaders, Harvard is pleased to invite you to join the Harvard Future Leaders Program, an exclusive initiative for students with the potential to become pioneers in the fields of policy, education, and social justice. This program not only offers the opportunity to study at Harvard, but also provides direct mentoring from top professors, access to influential leaders, and the chance to carry out transformative projects. We believe that you are not just an outstanding student, but also someone who can make a real difference in the world. If you are interested, please respond to this email so that we can arrange a personal interview. Amara stopped breathing for a moment. This was not just a regular acceptance letter. This was a groundbreaking offer. She had heard of the Harvard Future Leaders Program, one of the most prestigious admissions initiatives, only for those exceptional in academics, vision, and social impact. This meant they didn't just want her to be a student at Harvard. They wanted her to become a leader. She set her phone down, feeling an indescribable rush of emotions. Everything she had gone through, from her confrontation with Karen Whitfield on the plane, the pressure-filled moments of the competition, to the reflections after her victory, all led her to this moment. She couldn't help but smile. Just as Amara was sitting there, lost in thoughts, her phone vibrated. "Marcus." She answered without saying anything, and his excited voice came through immediately. "I bet you just got the email from Harvard." Amara laughed. "How did you know?" "Because I got it too." She blinked, surprised, but not entirely shocked. She knew Marcus had a bigger vision than just being an outstanding student, and if Harvard was looking for future leaders, they surely wouldn't overlook him. "This is insane," she said, her voice betraying her excitement. Marcus chuckled. "Not insane at all. We've proven we deserve this." She nodded, though he couldn't see. "I know, but this means a whole new journey is waiting for us." Marcus was silent for a moment, then spoke slowly but firmly. "And this time, we won't just be fighting for ourselves." Amara understood right away what he meant. The fight wasn't just about getting into Harvard. It wasn't just about personal success. It was about what they could do once they were inside the system. It was about opening doors for those who would come after. But as she thought about the journey ahead, Amara couldn't help but think of one name, Karen Whitfield. She wasn't naive enough to think that woman would give up easily. The world was full of people like her, those who believed they had the right to control who could succeed and who couldn't. Those willing to use every tool at their disposal to maintain the order they were used to. Karen had lost the competition, but that didn't mean she would stop trying to bring down people like Amara, because Amara's presence was a direct threat to people like her. But what was different now? Now, Amara was no longer the girl alone on the plane. Now, she had a community of people ready to stand with her. She had strength, she had a voice, and most importantly, she was no longer afraid. She looked back at the email once more, scrolling down to the end. "If you are interested, please respond to this email so that we can arrange a personal interview." Amara smiled, her finger moving across the screen, typing with certainty. "I am very interested in attending the interview. I look forward to meeting with you at the earliest opportunity." She hit send. And as she did so, she knew that the fight on the plane that day was just the beginning. The future still held many challenges, but she was ready to face them all. Amara had come through a challenging journey, from an unjust confrontation on a plane to a resounding victory in a prestigious academic competition. But more than a title, she had earned something far more important: the opportunity to make a real difference. The world was not lacking in people like Karen Whitfield, those trying to manipulate and control who could succeed. But the world also needed more people like Amara, those who dared to stand up, who dared to challenge, and who would not accept being limited by prejudice. Amara's journey had only just begun, and she was no longer alone. She had allies and greater opportunities, and most importantly, a mission to pursue. What about you? If you were Amara, how would you face Karen? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more inspiring stories. Thank you for watching.